Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and we're back with more Why This Class is Awesome. For many of you, this may be the first video you're seeing in the series, as we're covering some of the newest classes to come out for Pathfinder 2e. So I figured I'd just quickly go over the general gist of what this series is. This is not a class deep dive. This is me trying my best to give a quick, concise show of each of the classes, giving some feats and some of their cool abilities, or abilities I feel that people are overpassing, and talking about why a class is awesome, as well as describing certain rules that players might miss on their first go through looking through a character class. We don't always get the rules right here, obviously. I'm fallible like anyone else, but we do our best. And something I forgot to do in the last video as well, if you enjoy these kind of videos, please like and subscribe. It would really help out. I was very sick with COVID and had to take 2 weeks off with another illness than COVID. So any kind of bumps to the algorithm are highly appreciated. A simple like would be more than enough. And if you want something that's a little less committal, we have my Twitter down in the description, as well as you can join our Discord, which we talk all things tabletop, including things like Warhammer 40k. I also recruit there for my games first. If you want the chance to play with me and my friends, check it out. Now that that self-plug is out of the way, let's talk about the Psychic. So the Psychic is very cool in my opinion. It's a very interesting class, and it's mostly focused around having a magical feel to your character at all times. Now, the Psychic has less spell slots than other casters. They have 2 spell slots per level, which makes them above something like the Magus or the Summoner, but below most other classes. Now, that for a primary spellcasting class, that seems like a big deterrent, but in actuality, it's so the Psychic can get other benefits. The Psychic gets access to enhanced versions of certain cantrips, as well as unique cantrips that you get as you level up, and these cantrips are very strong. Eventually, you can get access to like a 3rd level fireball as a cantrip, which is immense. Not only that, but you do start with 2 focus points that you can use to amp these cantrips. Amping a cantrip increases how much damage it does usually, or enhances the other effects of the cantrip, and it's very good. It makes these essentially focus spells, focus cantrips, more powerful than most focus spells, I would say. Your focus point usage is very good and very efficient. The downside comes with the fact that you do get 2 focus points, and uniquely, the Psychic, as long as they only spend those focus points on amps or other psychic abilities, can refocus to get 2 focus points back. Now, if they use a focus point at all since the last time they rest for anything other than the Psychic ability, they can only refocus to get 1, which can be really rough, especially because you can't then refresh to the next time, even if you only use psychic abilities, because you have to spend at minimum 2. So it can be really rough. It does limit what kind of multi-class archetypes or archetypes you can take with the Psychic, because if you take anything that has focus points in it, you're going to be putting yourself in a sticky situation, and it's honestly not worth it. You get a huge bonus from refocusing to get those 2 focus points back. And not only that, but at level 5, you get a 3rd focus point. And you don't need more than that, because you can't have more than that. You get your 3rd focus point for all this for free. You don't even have to invest in feats. Most other classes get 1, maybe 2 if we're talking Oracle. Actually, Oracle, I think, actually gets all the way up to 3 eventually, but not nearly as early as the Psychic. Though, you still only get 2 back if you use your focus points only for amps or psychic abilities. You don't get all 3. You can get all 3 with a feat much later, but still, it makes it so that the Psychic is always ready to rock the house. They're always ready to come in, barrels blazing. They don't care if they don't, or they don't care if they just blast all their spell slots in a fight, because they still have really good cantrips to back it up. Now, we're going to get into some of those cantrips here in a little bit, but let's first talk about their Unleash Psyche ability. This is kind of like the unique ability that Psychic gets. It has a prerequisite that you have to have cast a spell on your prior turn, and you have to be already engaged in an encounter. So, you can't do this before combat. You can do this immediately after like a surprise round. If you use surprise rounds, we do, but not. Obviously, rules as written, surprise rounds are a little funky. Regardless, it's a really good ability because when you unleash your psyche for 2 rounds, your character is amped. Your character's got their imagination is sprouting around them. They have obviously psychic abilities going on them, so they can't hide it necessarily, but they can use, they do boost their damage. Any spell that does damage that does not have a duration adds double the spell level to the damage of the spell. So you're pumping extra damage into what spells you do are using, and I believe it can also be used for cantrips. Let me double check here real quick. Yep, it's all spells as long as they're considered psychic spells, so they come from your class, which is really good. On top of this, you get access to Psyche actions. And Psyche actions, you get what's called a subconscious mind. There are 4 subconscious minds. We'll go into that here in a little bit. And they each come with an action. And then there are feats that give you Psyche actions that allow you to essentially, while you're in this ascended form, to do things like damage enemies for an action, or to heal people for an action. There's a lot of really good benefits to unleashing your psyche, with some downsides, unfortunately. After the 2 rounds are up, you become Stupified 1 for 2 rounds, and you cannot unleash your psyche for 2 rounds. And it is important to mention as well, you can never unleash your psyche if you have the Stupified condition. It's, important to know. It rarely happens, but it can happen. Just so you know, the prerequisites are, and I'll look at it here just to double check. You're in an encounter, you cast a spell on your previous round, and you're not stupefied. Yep. And the Stupified condition, because this one's kind of rare, so I figure I should re-educate everyone on what Stupified does, is it reduces all spell casting and will-based checks and DCs. So it reduces your will DC, it reduces your spellcasting attacks and your spellcasting DCs, as well as if you attempt to cast a spell, you must make a DC 5 flat check or you lose the spell. That's really rough. Now, a DC 5 is not bad. You still have the upper 75% chance to not lose a spell, but it can make your character kind of not work really well. Now, the good benefit to this is 2 actions is a lot in most combat rounds. Most combats run from about 3 to 5 rounds, give or take. Longer in some bigger encounters, of course. But in that 3 to 5 rounds, if you use it second round, you'll probably be done with it by the time that the encounter is over. And Unleash Psyche is something I definitely recommend using more towards the middle part of the fight, when you feel like the fight might end in those 2 rounds, because Stupified is a really hard condition to work around, and it applies to anything that has the cast spell action, which is pretty much everything that the Psychic does. It's really rough. But I did mention earlier the subconscious mind. Now, Psychics get to pick 2 between subconscious mind and conscious mind. They get 1 subconscious mind and 1 conscious mind. The subconscious mind gives you essentially a psyche action, as well as access to certain feats, of course, and it determines what your spellcasting ability modifier is, because the psychic can essentially pick between intelligence or charisma based on what subconscious mind that they pick. This makes them flexible. You can play an intelligence-based caster or a charisma-based caster, and both of those have their benefits and downsides. Obviously, intelligence gives you more access to skills, and better recall knowledge checks, but charisma makes your character a better face and better at things like deception or even intimidate for demoralize. There's a lot of good benefits to both for sure. And then you get to pick a conscious mind. And the conscious mind determines what amped normal cantrips. You get 2 common cantrips that get amped above normal. And then you get a surface level cantrip starting at level 1, which is a unique cantrip just to your psychic. And then as you level up at level 5, you get a 3rd level cantrip, and I think it's actually 6 and 10, if I'm not mistaken here. Let me double check. Yes, it's at level 6 and level 10. You get the level 3 cantrip and the level 5 cantrip. So you do get a lot of really good cantrips, and I'm not going to go into all of those for this video. Obviously, it'll take a long video. And after thought matures, I figure we shouldn't do another 40-minute video, even though I'm sure a lot of you would be more than happy for me to do so. If you want a deep dive, there are deep dives on YouTube. I'm sure No Nat Once has gone through everything at this point, so you can check out one of his videos. There are other channels that did these videos as well. I'm just going to give you my favorite subconscious mind and conscious mind. So my favorite subconscious mind is emotional acceptance. Your character psyche is all focused around your deepest feelings, your feelings that kind of emanate through all your actions and everything like that, and finding connections. This one is a lot more of a support-based subconscious mind. It uses charisma as its key ability modifier, and you get Restore the Mind. Restore the Mind is a really cool psyche action because when your psyche is unleashed, you project reassurance and strength to the mind and bodies of your nearby allies. And with one action, you can grant one ally a singular effect that they then become immune to for 10 minutes. The 2 benefits are either a status bonus to saving throws against mental effects until your psyche ends. So that's 2 rounds of them having a status bonus to their saving throws against mental effects, which is good but not very common. What you're really using Restore the Mind for is you can give an ally a number of hit points equal to 2 plus double your level. This is really good, and not only that, but it's a single action. If you have 3 other teammates, in one round, you can give each of them, starting at level 1, 3 hit points. No, 4 hit points each. Not a lot, but as you level up, it gets a lot. By level 5, this action alone gives 12 HP as a single action to any ally within 30 feet. That's pretty big, especially at level 5. And not only that, but you just can do this as well as using your spells and doing other things. This is just added on top of the other effects of Unleashed Psyche. I really like emotional acceptance. It's something that is always going to be really good, and healing and health is a very major resource for, end game encounters. For a very strategic game like Pathfinder 2E, this cannot be underestimated. But let's look at my favorite conscious mind. So my favorite conscious, I had a real hard time picking it, and I have it pulled up here, so if my face is fleshed out, I apologize. But I had a really hard time picking my favorite. They're all really, really good. You'll have to check them out when the book's released to the public, probably the 27th or something like that, or check out one of the other channels in their deep dive. But my favorite, I think, is the Tangible Dream. The Tangible Dream is so cool. Now, each of these conscious minds give you a number of granted spells. These add to your spell repertoire on top of the spells that you pick for your spell slots. So you get access to color spray, mirror image. You know what? You can see it all here. They're all kind of illusory color-based images, and it's really cool. Dancing lights is not my favorite part of this one overall. It's okay. It gives you more control of dancing lights. You can essentially spread them out more than the 10 feet that they're normally allowed. It lets you light up a whole room. When you amp it, though, you create a flashing display comprised of all 4 of the lights in an unoccupied 5-foot square. If you move the lights when you sustain a spell, the lights must remain together. This spell gains a 5-foot emanation, or each creature in a 5-foot emanation from the lights must make a fortitude saving throw. If they succeed, they're dazzled until the start of your next turn. If they fail, they're dazzled until the start of your next turn, and then must attempt a new save whenever it starts its turn adjacent to the light. So they have to keep making the check. And if they crit fail, they're fascinated by the lights until the start of your next turn. It's actually a pretty good effect. And again, remember, this is a cantrip. And the amp, of course, uses a focus point. But honestly, being able to dazzle an enemy on their turn sucks because it makes everyone concealed to them. That's pretty bad, and Fascinated prevents them from doing anything. So that's pretty okay, but what's really cool is Shield. Because how the shield essentially works is when you cast shield, you can target instead an ally within 30 feet, giving them the benefits of the shield spell. And not only that, but you can still use your reaction to shield block for them. This is just what the shield spell gets with no amp, nothing. You can shield yourself or an ally. This is perfect for a more support kind of style build. This is really good in combat, but let's talk about the amps because they're actually pretty sick. When you amp it, you layer the shield spell 3 times to improve the defenses. Now, the duration increases to sustained for a minute. So it's not just one round, you can use an action to sustain it, and I would, because you get a lot of effects obviously for it, plus you're spending a focus point. The shield still lowers at the start of each of your turn, but you can raise it again using the sustain the spell action, obviously. So when you sustain it, automatically it's going to go back up. When you use shield block, one of the 3 layers disappear, and you gain the bonus to AC, but the spell doesn't end. Not only that, you can keep using the spell until the final layer is broken, and once it does, the spell ends and you can't recast shield or empowered shield again for 10 minutes. Now you can choose to use additional layers when you use the shield block reaction, and this is essentially each layer past the first is going to add half of its bonus. So if you use 2 shields, you increase the hardness by 1.5 or 1.5 times. And if you use all 3 shields, you increase it by twice. I also like what they do here where they actually tell you how much that exactly is for each of the heightened levels for the shield cantrip. And obviously, if you break all 3 of the layers in this way, the spell ends, can't do it again for 10 minutes, all that kind of jazz. But this is so good. You can add to yourself or an ally 3 versions of the shield cantrip. Personally, I would just use the shield block once and then do that for, up to 3 times. That's a lot of damage negation and a metric ton of damage negation. It's actually kind of nuts how good this really is. Now, obviously, you can also just use it for one big blast and for, combats, which are, I said before, last between 3 and 5 rounds. Obviously, if you're towards the end of the combat and you're about to take a big hit anyway, might as well just go for broke and double your shield's hardness and take no damage from the effect or an ally. This is great. But you know what makes this Conscious Mind better? Imaginary Weapon. Because Imaginary Weapon allows you to make melee spell strikes with a weapon you conjure yourself. This weapon does bludgeoning or slashing damage, and it does a d8 plus your spell casting modifier. On a crit success, you deal double the damage as per normal when you do any kind of attack spell or strike. And you can choose to detonate your spell to push the target 10 feet away from you when you do a crit success. And because it's a cantrip, you can do this every turn. If you crit an enemy one turn, you can do it the next. There's nothing else. And not only that, but every time it heightens, it increases by a d8. When you put this in the perspective of a weapon, this is nuts. Because a weapon, normally you get access to a +1 striking weapon by level 3 to 5, somewhere in that range. By level 5, you're rolling 3d8. You're rolling an extra damage die plus your spellcasting ability modifier. This makes it essentially a better weapon than most weapons. Granted, it's a weapon strike that takes 2 actions, so action economy wise, it's not as good, and obviously you can't attack twice with it, But still, that's really solid. But wait, there's more. You can amp it, and when you do, you make 2 imaginary weapon strikes, each against a different target, and you don't apply the multiple attack penalty until after both strikes are made. And when you hype it, each heightened level increases the damage by 2d8 instead of 1d8. So if you heighten this, when you're level 5, you're doing 5d8 damage, 2 strikes to 2 different people. This makes a psychic in melee combat super viable, especially when you consider the shield spell, which is 1 action, by the way. So you can shield or sustain the shield and then use your imaginary weapon. And you can make it last for 3 rounds. You can be right up in someone's face, attacking with a weapon, keeping your shield up. Your enemies will not, even though you get about as much health as a wizard or sorcerer does, you will be way more sustainable than them, and even classes that get, 8 hit points plus comp per level. It's really good. The other effects are pretty okay. Imaginary weapon was essentially my big thing about this particular conscious mind, but Astral Rain is really cool. What Astral Rain does is essentially you create a 5-foot cube of raining down weapons or something of a variety that you choose. You pick whether the target, the first time a target either enters this area or starts their turn in this area, they need to make a basic reflex save against 2d4 plus your spellcasting modifier in your choice of bludgeoning or piercing damage. This is really good. And not only that, but because it's a basic reflex save, this is always likely to do at least some damage to an opponent. And remember, this is a cantrip. This is a cantrip. It does 2d4 and then plus 1d4 for every heightened level. And not only that, but if you amp this cantrip, it expands it to a 5-foot burst, which is, a 10-foot by 10-foot cube, essentially. And you can sustain the spell, and when you do, the first time you sustain it, you can move this burst up to 20 feet, allowing you to consistently keep this on your opponents as long as you're sustaining the spell. The amp doesn't increase its damage, so obviously Astral Rain doesn't really have a high damage potential, but because it's a basic save, you're always doing damage. It's a really decent cantrip overall, and it's a really good way to maintain a level of control on the battlefield, especially when you amp it, because you can move that cube and you only need 1 action to maintain it to be there. So enemies can choose whether they want to be taking a bunch of damage or they want to move out of it. This is really good area control. And last but not least, there's Hologram Cage, which is the level 5 cantrip. It's their best cantrip. It's not that cool in my opinion, and it's 3 actions to cast, but it does last for a minute. You create a 20-foot cube with 20 feet on each side, which is a pretty big area, honestly. And when you do so, the walls shed bright light for 10 feet and dim for the next 20 feet, and it completely blocks line of sight to creatures within the cage. Can't be seen by creatures on the outside. Now, other creatures in the cage can see each other. It's essentially a large cube that pretty much blocks line of sight. If you drop this on a caster, they have to move or they can't use a spell, because most spells require line of sight in order to activate. That is already pretty massive. Not only that, but since it completely blocks line of sight, this allows creatures to use it to hide, do all kinds of other things, inside, outside, whatever. Really good area control. You can dismiss the spell if you choose to, or if you cast the spell again, the other one disappears. Now at 7th level, this heightens, and the spell gets a 80-foot range rather than 60-foot, and that you can expand the cube to 25 feet on each side. It's a little bit bigger, but overall not a super big change. When you heighten it, you force the walls of the cage to be a physical barrier as well as a visual one. Each 10-foot by 10-foot section of the cage has an AC of 10 and a hardness equal to double the spell's level, and HP equal to quadruple the spell's level. This spell is disrupted if any of its walls would pass through a creature when you cast it. So what essentially this does is when you amp it, you create a literal cage. At level 10, when you first get access to this, it gets a 10 hardness. That means any attacks that hit it have their damage reduced by 10, which is pretty big, honestly. And it has 4 times 20 HP overall. That's pretty good. That's pretty massive. Enemies can't move through it. It's a physical object. You literally can just lock people out of the combat for a focus point for at least a round or so. They might take all their actions just to bust through one of the walls, and each 10 foot by 10 foot area is, you know, a part of the same hardness. So they bust down one wall, you still have the other walls that you can use for things like cover and everything like that. Overall, the Tangible Dream is a really good, very solid cantrip that you can use. And like I said, I like this one mostly for Imaginary Weapon. It's a really, really good kind of focus spell. Or not focus spell, sorry, cantrip that you can use to make a melee psychic, which I think is really cool. This one has a good mix of support abilities in with it and the ability to go up. Like, it has a good mix of offense and defense. And the psychic provides a lot of different styles of play. You can be full caster, you have melee options, you can go full support if you really want to. You can pick between intelligence and charisma using your subconscious mind. This is a really, really good class. And I'm sorry if this video has gotten a little long. We're probably sitting right now at about the 28-minute mark, 27-minute mark, something like that. So I'm just going to go over a couple of my favorite cantrips, and then we're going to go ahead and end the video. But first, a couple of my favorite cantrips here. Thought Form Summoning is super cool. Now, the occult tree, because psychics, I didn't mention before, psychics are occult spellcasters. Makes sense. Mostly illusion and mental-based spells, obviously. They actually get access to a lot of good summoning spells, believe it or not. And Thought Form Summoning is super cool because when you summon, you can choose for them to be thought forms instead. When you do this, they get resistance equal to half of their level to all physical damage, right? They get access to, against physical damage. So all physical damage are essentially ghosts. But they do get a weakness to force and mental damage. Mental damage is not super common, and force is moderately common. It doesn't come up a lot, especially for a lot of enemies that you're facing against, especially against marshals. That almost never comes up. So they just get resistance, making your summons that much more durable. And not only that, but your summons can move through enemy squares without having to succeed a tumble through. This allows for flanking a lot easier. This makes your summons very dangerous on the battlefield because they can reposition with very little issue. Even if they provoke attacks of opportunity, if it's a physical attack, it's going to get reduced. It makes this is a really, really good feat. Strain Mind is another really good feat for the psychic that wants to continuously amp their spells. Now, if you're out of focus points, as a free action, you can essentially generate a focus point. So once per hour, when you have no focus points, you strain your body. You, as a free action, you add a focus point to the spell of a cantrip you're about to cast, and instead of paying its normal focus point cost, you lose a number of hit points equal to 4 times the spell's level of the amped psi cantrip as you bleed from your nose or suffers from some other visible sign of strain. So this only works for amps, for cantrips specifically. And this obviously can be really bad. But if you're a backline caster especially, this is really good to continue pumping the hurt on the enemies. When you amp your cantrips, a lot of them get really good effects and can compete with spells, you know, like 3 levels under your highest spell level, which is pretty solid. And this is just a good way to allow you to do so, especially if you have a healer in the group. You start taking a little bit too much damage, they can heal you back up, but you can keep laying the hurt at the cost of HP. This is really good, but the next feat is going to be even better, because if you don't want to hurt yourself for getting a focus point back, why don't you hurt the enemy instead? We're going to be talking about Brain Drain. So Brain Drain is 2 actions. And this is a Psyche action, so you have to have your Psyche unleashed. But when you have your Psyche Unleash, you pick one non-mindless creature, so it doesn't work on things like zombies or skeletons, within 30 feet, and they must attempt a will save against your spell DC. If they succeed, nothing happens. But if they fail, they become Stupified 1 for 1 minute, and you regain 1 focus point up to your normal maximum. You can't use Brain Drain again until after the next time you make your daily preparations, so you only cannot use Brain Drain if you have successfully caused an enemy to fail it. So that means if they succeed, you can attempt a Brain Drain again at a later point, which is actually really good. Now, it is only once a day, or pretty much until your next daily preparations, which is kind of rough, but that's still really good. And again, it's a good way to get those focus points back in the middle of combat. And if they crit fail, they become Stupified 2, which against spellcasters, that's pretty bad. But if it's not a spellcaster, Stupified 2 still reduces their will DC, which means your mental spells, which a lot of them are going to be more likely to hit them. So not only do you get a focus point back, but you make the enemy essentially weaker to your mental spells. Brain Drain's really good, and there's so many other really good feats and abilities in the Psychic. And again, this video has gone on longer than I would have liked, but I wanted to give you guys just a little bit of a taste of what the Psychic has in store for you if you look into the Dark Archive. So I hope you all liked this video, and as I mentioned before, leave a like or subscribe if this is your kind of content. I do my best to kind of make these as quick and as concise as possible, and I think I did that really well. If I didn't, if you have any idea how I could improve this format, please let me know, and please don't let me know you want a full deep dive. Those exist on YouTube. This is for the purpose of people who want to know what a class is about, get enough of a taste for it, so that they can decide whether they want to dive in more or not. And so, with that, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have good luck with your games. Lead the bad luck to me, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.